Nice to have you all here. It's my real pleasure to introduce our speakers and chair this morning. We have three wonderful speakers who, by the nature of the conversation we all had earlier this week, is going to be very lively and very interesting as a discussion. So, our first panelist, Marie Nixon, is the theatre director at Sunderland Empire. It's a commercially operated venue at the heart of Sunderland's Culture Quarter and Riverside Regeneration Area. Marie has worked in the arts, culture, and charity sector for 30 years, starting out as a musician. Just talking about that, apparently from the ages of, what was it, 15 to 18, Marie?
Yeah.
Yeah. Very good. I love that as a starting point. She's moved into roles in artist management as a funder at Arts Council England and as a CEO with the University of Sunderland Students' Union before starting at the Empire Theatre. As well as being proud to be a trustee at the Music, Arts and Culture Trust and Sunderland Culture, Marie is a director at We Make Culture, CIC, and director of Sunderland Business Improvement District. Good morning, Marie.
Hi.
Our next speaker is Michelle McGrath. Michelle has been a learning engagement and inclusion specialist in the cultural sector for 16 years. She's currently head of engagement at Brixton House and has previously worked at Beaux Arts, the British Museum and the Royal Museums Greenwich, developing and delivering learning programs focused on underrepresented audiences. Alongside this work, Marie founded museum as Muck in 2018 through frustration at the lack of people from low socioeconomic backgrounds in the sector. And she now leads the network to provide support for members, consultation for organisations, and advocacy for structural change. Michelle was a trustee for the Museums Association from 2021 to 2023. And finally, pleasure to welcome our chair, Della Hill. Della is currently the Operations and Social Impact Manager at National Theatre Wales, as well as acting as a consultant and speaker and being a Western Jerwood associate. Della has used her previous experience of delivering large-scale initiatives to address structural inequalities, alongside advocating for high-level social change within the creative arts and cultural and education sectors. It's a real pleasure to welcome you all and to hand over to you, Della. Good morning.
Thank you so much. And hi, everyone. I'm Della Hill. Thanks for that fantastic introduction, Jonathan. I'm chairing this exciting panel today. I'm a mixed race woman in her late 20s. I've got curly brown, kind of short hair. I'm wearing a black jumper and I'm sitting in front of a white wall. Before I begin, Marie and Michelle, I might hand over to you for audio descriptions. Is that okay? Marie, can we hand over to you first, please?
Sure. Hi, everyone. I'm Marie Nixon. I'm a white woman in my mid-40s. Got a lovely white jumper on. I think it's lovely. Anyway, sitting against a black background and a poster, the corner of a poster of the musical Wicked. Nice to meet you all.
Thank you. Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us this morning. I'm so excited to be part of this panel and to kind of steer the conversation today as we talk about a really important topic, both in the sector and to myself as well, which is socio-economic diversity in governance. And today we'll be delving into a few key questions surrounding this topic, thinking about the changes that we could make as kind of individuals that engage with governance structures of arts and cultural organisations in the UK. And I'm really excited to be kind of sharing the floor with the fellow panellists, the fantastic Marie and Michelle, when she comes back, hopefully with sound. But essentially, we're just kind of aiming to have quite an informal conversation and share some of our views around this topic. And before we do dive into the panel discussion today, we did think it would just be useful to kind of draw our attention to the term or some of the terms that we might be using in the session. So I'm thinking socioeconomic diversity. What do we mean by that? When we think about working class or socioeconomic or those from lower socioeconomic backgrounds. And for the purpose of this webinar, we've utilised the fantastic toolkit produced by the Western Jerwood Creative Bursaries programme. And a shameless plug, because I was a fellow on the programme, I think that there's a link on the webinar website page if you'd like to see it, and we can circulate that after. But essentially, hi Michelle, should we do a test?
Hello everyone.
Yeah, We've got you back. Fantastic. Thank you. I'm just kind of sharing some insights with the audience on the terminology that we're going to be talking about today. And then I'll come to you for the first question. So glad that the sound's all good. So when we're thinking about socioeconomic diversity, we're talking about the things encompassed in the socio-economic circumstances that an individual may come from. And this may include things like parental occupation. We might refer to education level, household income, location for some particular topics. But there's also kind of a broad range of other, sometimes intangible aspects of a person's background as well that we might not necessarily be able to measure, but that's all kind of encapsulated in this theme. And although we don't have masses of data on it, we do know that there's a lack of representation for individuals, particularly from lower socioeconomic backgrounds, in our charity and arts-based governance structures today. So with this in mind, it's also just useful, I think, to note something that we spoke a lot about when we were developing this toolkit, was that maybe these labels don't work for everyone. So while, you know, they're fantastic for the funding applications that we all do, or the lovely case studies on the website, and we might be speaking to colleagues in the sector. Again, I think it's just useful to note that maybe that might not work for everyone. But nonetheless, our goal today is to get stuck into a conversation. There will be a bit of promoting of inclusivity, I hope. We'll be having a think about the barriers, but also, yeah, to acknowledge the kind of start of this conversation in the sector. And then we'll have plenty of time for questions at the end. So, Michelle, I'm going to come to you first with the hope that sound works. Thinking about your role as founder of Museum as Muck, and your experience in the arts and cultural sector in general, why do you think it's important for organisations to have socioeconomic representation and inclusion within governance structures?
Good morning, everyone. Hopefully you can hear me now. I am a 40-year-old white Irish woman with long salt and pepper hair piled up on top of my head. So yes, I mean, really, we're here today to talk about the importance of socioeconomic diversity, specifically, with reference to governance, of course. And, you know, I suppose for me, coming from a low socioeconomic background, it started off as a bit of a personal thing where I just needed to find my community, because I'd spent, you know, 10 years in the cultural sector and experienced huge amounts of kind of difficulty in facing so many barriers and having to come over certain challenges related to my socioeconomic background. That it started off as, you know, just needing personal support, but actually, of course, it is a huge sector-wide issue. And I think for me, then it grew into being able to support other people. So first, I guess there's something about the importance of looking after ourselves and each other, and it's vital that we look after our workforce and our governance people. But, you know, I think we have a kind of an ethical duty to serve everyone in our society, particularly when, you know, we're talking about cultural organisations or public services or charities. You know, it's our duty to make those accessible to everyone. I think that by having more socioeconomically diverse governance, we're going to be able to make better decisions. We bring vast range of experiences, which actually just feeds into, you know, thinking more creatively about how to problem solve and become more innovative. Especially, you know, often when we're talking about governance, we're talking about boards of charities, for example, that are looking to deliver activity with or for underrepresented groups. So, if we have that lived experience within a board, we're going to be creating much more relevant solutions. And I suppose the final thing I just want to say on that is, when we're thinking about governance, and if the aim of maybe, people here today, welcome to everyone, and thank you for kind of taking that first step and being interested in diversifying boards with particular reference to this issue. Like attracts like. So if your board is full of one type of person, it's going to attract the same type of person. And when I spoke to some of the members of Museum as Muck about coming onto this panel, the response is kind of like, well, why would I want to be on a board? It's not for me. And I might talk a bit more about that as we go along, but for me, if you want to diversify your board, which you should, you need to make it appealing for people. People need to want to be on it, and people from low socioeconomic backgrounds don't really want to be on boards at the moment. I'll leave it there.
Thank you very much. Absolutely, I'm excited to kind of reflect on lived experience. That's a massive topic of today. I'm also from a low socioeconomic background as well. So yeah, it's kind of important then for us to have the space to be able to speak about things. And interesting that you said, because I think I feel the same with my fellow peers from similar backgrounds. It's not for me. So that's an interesting point that hopefully we'll be able to get stuck in. And Marie, you've also held a variety of trusteeships and have extensive experience in the sector as well. So drawing on your experience of being in both those executive level CEO roles, but also on the other side in governance trusteeships as well, why is it important for you that socioeconomic diversity is considered at board level?
So yes, my name is Marie and I am a serial trustee. I can't stop. I think there's so much good stuff around being a trustee, and so much benefit that you can get as an individual, as a community, and as organisations. But it's absolutely right that we should pull it apart and examine kind of how governance works and what the real contribution is and how we can make it better. I suppose for me, similar to you two, definitely from very much from Sunderland, from lower socioeconomic background myself, and very proudly so. I think what I think about and what kind of occurs to me a lot is I think that our communities have got, and our people of low socioeconomic kind of social grades, etc., have got a really long and proud and rich history of participation in community shaping, in making decisions, in campaigning, and it's, I'm from a city that has become post-industrial in my lifetime, which is not necessarily something I recommend. And the city is absolutely in a good place now, but it really does make me think about kind of our ongoing and important role in shaping the places and the organisations and the society that we want to live in through all of the ways in which we work together. And so, this goes all the way from like my nana being an absolute stalwart of the British Legion in our pit village, doing every committee role, every, tea, whatever afternoon tea thing, raffle, doing the bingo, like for decades, through to kind of the industrial relations organising, kind of most visible in the 80s, and that continues today. But even, to the working men's clubs, which don't exist and were completely imperfect, but had governance structures and had outreach programmes, and because of them, that's the group that first brought me to the Sunderland Empire to see a pantomime. That means I'm like, oh my God, the performance is amazing. And, it sets you off on a path. So I think we see this richness. And then when you look at kind of maybe charity and cultural organisation governance, you then don't see that richness. And for me, there's just a massive missed opportunity and a big question about, oh, well, what's that about actually? When we're thinking about, you know, the intended beneficiaries of lots of our organisations, like it should be that we're kind of still very much in the mix with all of that, but it isn't the case. So I think that's something that really kind of plays on my mind, something that I really pay attention to when I'm thinking about where I would like to be a trustee and where I would like to kind of try and make the most difference. And also, I'm really lucky that I was, previous to this role, I was the chief exec of a students' union, which has got really unusual governance arrangements, and that you have elected trustees who are usually young people because they're students and they are paid. So there are like different ways in which you can kind of play with governance structures. That is very unique, but there was a lot of learning from that, which I think can be brought to bear on how we diversify boards in general, but specifically around first-time trusteeship, people from all kinds of backgrounds getting in the mix with making decisions about the organisations that matter to them.
Excellent. Thank you so much. Yeah, I absolutely agree. And particularly that's a point that I was thinking about is, well, you know, not necessarily convincing the audience, but sharing with the audience why we think it's important. And it is that individuals from low socioeconomic backgrounds do often benefit massively from interventions from arts and cultural charities and general charities across the UK. I know kind of my life was not deteriorated, but popped in a lot of different directions through that intervention. And also love hearing about your nan and bingo. My mum and I'm from a small community. Every Tuesday night, my mum and nan run the bingo, etc.
It's important.
It's really important. And funny because I remember my first day in the sector. So I was recruited and I had my salary paid for through a scheme because I was from a disadvantaged background. And I remember the first day at my job in the arts, and I Googled what is a trustee. I had absolutely no idea. Like, why is everyone talking about governance? What does a board of directors do? Are we in, you know, the American TV show Suits? This is giving me suited and booted. I'm so intimidated. But actually, it did take me a couple of months to think, oh, Nan is on the committee for X pub, or this is how we do it, but we don't use this language. And actually, maybe sometimes in our community, it's a bit more organised. So interesting kind of point.
Yeah.
But it's without the language and maybe the intimidation of it as well. Because I definitely think there's something around just debunking it, you know, and actually letting people know what being a trustee means. I know Charity Commission has launched the really fantastic 5-minute guides, which we found really helpful in the boards that I kind of engage with. But fantastic. Well, thank you for sharing your thoughts around that. I'm not sure which one of you wants to answer this next question, but essentially, I think it would be great if we could have a chat about some of the ways that we can attract trustees from kind of low socioeconomic backgrounds or diverse socioeconomic backgrounds. So what are the kind of best practices that we could be doing as organisations and boards to get people in the door? And there's a kind of second point to this question about how do we quantify or measure the success of this? Anyone got any thoughts?
I can just kind of jump off what you were just talking about, which is you were saying about debunking and language and things. And I think one of the key things that comes up for me is about transparency. And again, to refer back to the members of Museum as Muck, you know, and talking about this panel, questions with like, what is governance? Like, we don't know what that is. That's not something that we grew up understanding. It's not something that is relevant to us at all. I mean, if you've not been part of a workplace, how on earth are you going to know what a governing board is? So I think it's it's being really open and transparent about what it actually means, because exactly like you've said, Della and Marie, as soon as you kind of, you're like, oh, well, okay, I can relate to that actually, but you know, we do it in really different ways, but it's making it relevant and making it clear. And like, why would you not do that, you know, unless you want to gatekeep, making things accessible. So I think that you've got to make governance something that people from low socioeconomic backgrounds want to do. They're not going to want to do it if it's inaccessible, it's opaque, it's full of jargon, it's all, you know, old white middle class men on a board. Like, that is not appealing. So you've got to start the process by truly being open, I think, about what a board looks like and why people from low socioeconomic backgrounds would want to be involved. I don't want to get too much into, because I think we're probably going to go on to kind of particular ways of changing it, but I think, yeah, so that's kind of attracting people to your existing board, and quantifying the approaches. I mean, to be honest, I'm not quite sure actually, Marie and Della, how you landed on this part, but for me, I understood that as you know, how do you measure success? Like, how do you know if you have diversified your board? With regards to socioeconomic background, and I think you've touched upon like how you measure socioeconomic background, and it's not a case of people, you know, kind of just self-identifying, because actually people get it wrong, and you need to look at more than just kind of finance. It's not just money. We need to, you know, when we're thinking about social class, it's also your level of education, your parental occupation, all those things that you said, Della. But I think that the measure of success would be not only having people from low socioeconomic backgrounds wanting to be on your board, being able, like, actually, you know, being elected or co-opted onto your board, but being able to stay, because I think that unless you make it a hospitable environment, people from those backgrounds, our backgrounds, might begin to see the appeal, but then once they're in that space, actually are just coming up against the same old structural issues and interacting with people in the same ways. So actually, it's not sustainable for me to stay here. Yeah, but I'd be interested to know if you had different thoughts about that, Marie.
I've got a couple of things that it kind of brings up for me. One is, I think you've just got to make it possible for people to do, like, just simply possible. I think the average weekly volunteering time for a trustee is like nearly 5 hours or something, which actually feels quite high to me. If I was doing 5 hours on every board I was on, that would be a lot. But so for some folks, that's tricky. So, you know, you can't necessarily pay trustees. That's its own debate, and maybe we'll come to that. But presuming you can't, you can pay travel expenses, childcare, accommodation if you need an away day. You can have judicious use of digital meetings with in person, and be quite careful and thoughtful around how you use that time. We can make it easier. I think we can make it more enjoyable, and there's more to talk about in terms of that later. So I think that's one thing around kind of making it accessible. And the other one, which I think is a bit of a challenge to us as people involved in governance, is, can we relinquish our obsession with the professions a little bit when it comes to governance? So I think several boards feel a level of anxiety if they don't have like a number of solicitors or accountants and other folks kind of around the table, and it doesn't feel like a comfortable place. But the reality is, the people in the professions, the kind of socioeconomic diversity within that is declining. So I think it's something like 21% of lawyers in 2015 were from a lower socioeconomic background, and in 2023 that was 18%. So there are fewer lawyers that are like us. Only 18% of KPMG's workforce is self-identified as working class. So if those people are a thing you want, and you've got quite fixed ideas of that's kind of what a trustee looks like, then you're putting challenges and putting barriers in your own way. And I suppose, obviously, there is a comfort as a trustee of having like some of that knowledge around the table. But the reality is all trustees have to act with due care and skill. It's possibly can be a more vulnerable place to have one lawyer around the table going, oh, I think it's fine, rather than the whole trustee board taking advice and doing the due diligence that we know that you need to do to make sure that you acquit your duties when things get dicey or you're making big decisions. So kind of does having the professions around the table give a bit of a false reassurance, and actually what we're reassuring is our own sense of what a trustee looks like. And that's kind of one example, but there are probably others of folks that we think we should have kind of represented around the table, but actually we can challenge our own perceptions and maybe think a bit more broadly than that, and think about what our kind of team sheet could look like and what it could do for us as an organisation.
Absolutely. I love that. And particularly, I think it is useful just to highlight alongside the particular professions, the cost of living crisis, which is happening at the moment and creating an even wider wealth kind of inequality gap within the country today. So absolutely kind of threatening. And okay, fab. Just kind of circling back to one of Michelle's points about what is governance. I actually had to Google it today because I was, when you're doing a panel and it's like, oh my God, I've suddenly forgot all my knowledge on the topic that we're just about to go and speak about. So refresh that knowledge. And then I thought it would be interesting this morning, because sometimes I can be quite opinionated. But I utilize ChatGPT. I don't know if anyone's familiar with the AI bot. Currently saving my life doing lots of jobs. That's a way, if you're a trustee, to save time. But I asked it this morning over coffee, like, what do we think, or what is the stereotype for a trustee of a charity in the UK? And it said an older, affluent individual, so interested with the affluence, that holds some sort of kind of position in society, from a more privileged background, and is usually older and a white male. So that was interesting. I didn't want to bring my own bias, but yeah, kind of thinking about if we have a kind of range of individuals from low socioeconomic backgrounds, seeing that and thinking that that's what a trustee should be, that's really an uncomfortable space to be, kind of, and the imposter syndrome comes up, isn't it? And again, Marie, I loved your point on the profession as well, particularly looking at those stats of how those kind of traditional roles, our lawyer, our trustee, our accountant in the room, and maybe thinking about absolutely how we change our perception as an organisation, and put emphasis. Going back to the point on paying trustees, I know obviously that's well out of our control, but I'm just kind of thinking about some particular advice points for the audience, whether there's a kind of lived experience consultation element of kind of getting the register of benefits. I know sometimes it can feel uncomfortable to pay trustees, but if you have got an individual that's providing lived experience insight beyond the looking at management accounts or looking at policies, etc., that might be something to consider. And also, just before we move on, I'm not going to take the space because I'll go off in tangents. You'll be hearing from me for 10 minutes. But at National Theatre Wales, and we've recently kind of adopted a co-chair model. So we've got two chairs that sit at the head of our organisation, two fantastic individuals. And one of them was slightly less experienced specifically in the sector. And they were round kind of offering us what we needed for that sector kind of terminology or info, etc. So we recruited both and made that decision. So it's not necessarily a shadowing opportunity, but actually just a chance for those individuals to share. And they're both very busy individuals as well. So that time commitment of average 5 hours is slashed to 2.5, let's say, maybe a bit more for a chair, and they can bounce off each other. So that's an interesting model that I just wanted to bring up for the audience. Also, just a segue to apologise. I've got a bit of a cold, so I've got my tissue if you keep notice, and I'm on mute and I'm sniffling, so apologies. So kind of moving on and thinking about then maybe looking and thinking about the barriers that we as individuals from low socioeconomic backgrounds may come across in governance structures. And again, maybe either or can take this question. Please jump in first. But so what types of governance or what aspects of governance then do we think needs evolving to kind of let us in and to make sure that organisations are providing a bit more of a comfortable environment for us? Maybe thinking about, Michelle, I loved your point on, well, if we want to measure it, how long do people stay? But yeah, what parts of governance do you think organisations could be shifting today?
Do you want to do that one, Michelle? I'm sure you've thought lots.
Sure, I'll go ahead and jump in. So yes, okay, the aspects of governance that need to change. We've spoken about transparency. We've spoken about making the board appealing to be on. Marie, I really liked your mention of time. I think time is a really key one, actually, because if you're from a lower socioeconomic background, you probably have your job going on, or you have multiple jobs because you need more than one. You probably have additional caring responsibilities. There's a lot going on. So time is really key. Can we change, the expectation of time from one person needed? I think obviously pathways getting onto a board, that needs to change. So often, and I've seen it, so often it is, oh, I've asked my mate. This is just absolutely terrible practice of keeping things within certain socioeconomic statuses. I think that one of the things in my experience of a trustee, I think if people like us, are on boards, there's a really easy, because it's always been the same way, it's usually people who kind of either have senior roles in different sectors, or perhaps are retired or have additional time, and it's assumed that you have, or it's assumed that you have a conventional job structure, and that means that okay, so your organisation will pay for your travel. Your organisation will pay for your accommodation if you're asked to go to a conference or a meeting or something. So firstly, we may not have those jobs in kind of more resourced organisations that are going to do that. Secondly, we certainly can't pay for those things ourselves, and I think there can be an expectation that trustees will do that. And actually, one of my achievements whilst being a trustee was, for the first time, having changing the policy so that trustees' expenses were paid for, because nobody like me had obviously been on a board before to say, well, actually, no, I can't pay my expenses. You've got to do that for us. So I think it's really, what should happen is that you should be proactive and not wait for people to have to ask about these things, because actually another person might feel quite ashamed, because when we talk about class, we've been oppressed, we've been made to feel like we are lower, we've been made to feel like we are not as valued in society as people from other classes. So there is a lot of shame attached to being from a low socioeconomic background. So for some reason, I've taken it upon myself, as other members of my network, to be the voice for others and just be like, look, sod it, I'm just going to say it because I've had enough. But actually, some people might not feel confident in asking for that. So do you know what? Don't make people ask. Have it as a proactive work of inclusion, that you just offer people expensive, like that is So simple. Also, you know, if you're asking me to pay for a train ticket and you're gonna pay it back, but like, don't make me pay for it and then have to request it back. Pay for it up front. I might not have that £100 in my bank account to pay for the train ticket. These are practical things, and often it's about making practical changes, because so often we sit in these forums and we talk and we talk and we talk, but inclusion is action. Once if you become a trustee and you're in that board, another thing that you can change is this kind of, this for me is a bit of a, I'm not sure where I really land in it, but let's say, for example, as a trustee, you're meant to be advocating, you're meant to be networking. You need to kind of be really clear and transparent about what that means, what your expectations are. So as a trustee, we expect you to network and advocate. That is what it looks like. If you don't come from a background where finding out who like around you is going to be beneficial to progressing your life, which is so often, you know, the case if you come from a higher class, if you don't know, you know, if you've not had to network in your life, you're not going to know what that is and how to do it. So you need to be really clear about what that is. So I think, you know, not assuming that people understand these kind of middle class codes of behaviour is the one that I'll finish on for now.
Amazing. Thank you. Okay, so we've got some fantastic points.
I've got a quick one to add to that, Della, if that's all right. Just
you go ahead.
I can see in the chat, Louise has put most boards pay expenses, so it's not unusual. Yeah, I totally get that. I have had an experience of a board where they had a policy where they did pay expenses, and this is kind of the culture versus policy thing, isn't it? There was a general agreement around the table that we weren't going to do that because that's not the kind of people we were. So we could claim them, but the board decided they weren't going to because that's kind of not our vibe. And so that's like genuinely unhelpful. Because even as if Michelle, you were saying there, like you are feeling brave and bold and you might put your head above the parapet, that's kind of an immediate, it's not even transactional, is it? It's not about that one individual thing. That's about things saying like, not you, not your sort of folks. You're not in our thinking. So I think that's tricky. And I think the culture versus what's written down is like a really important thing to examine. And I suppose that's one of the things, I've said it in maybe quite a facile way, but one of the things that I wanted to discuss was kind of, I really feel like in many circumstances, the formality we impose on it is kind of the death of vibrant participation. So we bring folks in, and this is all different types of folks, but I think has a particular bearing on socioeconomic background. We've been dead imaginative in our advertising. We've not just asked our mates, we've asked everybody. Our recruitment has been spot on. We get a diverse range of candidates we've recruited. Brilliant. In they come. And then we put them in a series of the most boring, stultifying, formal, scary, big boardroom, quite remote from any life experience or work experience that they've had, where maybe the only time they'll have been called at the big office is to get told off, basically, and get wrong for something. And I think it's a shame for lots of ways, but also it's bizarre because in any other area of our organisation, most of us, I'm sure, are amazing at running a meeting, brilliant at running a participatory session. Like we really know what to do to get the best out of people, if that's what we're thinking about and if that's what we are trying to achieve. You know, lots of different facilitation tactics, getting people to talk in groups of two and reporting back, rather than having people feel that in that, you know, intimidating group of people that literally has legal power over an organisation, that they are going to be the one and speak up. And maybe the big fear, obviously, is asking a really daft question, isn't it? And kind of being exposed as a person who definitely doesn't fit in. So I think that's something really for us to think about. And there's lots of practice with young trustees and other types of trustees to draw on there in terms of how you really get the best out of the people in the room and get the best decisions, rather than, I know we have to do it because many of the things are just like the requirements, but like wading through, you know, an endurance test of 50 pages of papers, 4 or 5 of which will be management accounts, which you also may have never seen or had any experience of. Like those are scary things, but not hard things. And I think once folks have a bit of experience of them, like with anything, we know that people of low socioeconomic backgrounds are smart, very fiscally responsible, really good at keeping track of what needs to happen. Like there are loads of brilliant characteristics that we want those folks to bring to our meetings. And so people catch on really quick, but it's about what responsibility we take for making those interactions engaging and vibrant and an enjoyable experience. And I suppose the only other thing I'd like to put as a corollary to that is a massive high five, big shout out to the role of the professional clerk and governance coordinator and person who keeps the show on the road. Not all organisations have them, of course. There are freelance ones, but I think for people who have not a great deal of experience of governance, and actually for people who have loads but maybe have not had the best experience, the judicious application of some kind of professional clerking to keep you on the straight and narrow can mean that you can have both of those things, a really compliant board, but a really interactive board that makes good decisions based on good discussions.
Thank you so much both. I was gonna, I know I agree with everything, and hopefully there's been some key pointers, from a bit of a mention of recruitment to informalising, being transparent, thinking about time, pathways, and I love the kind of formality is the death of participation sometimes. I definitely agree, and have kind of been, I've been on the other side of that, but I've been so ridiculously intimidated. I think something for me, and I'm just looking at the time because we've got one more thing to cover before the break. When I first joined the board, I had a fellow board member, the legendary Sandeep from Spread the Word, sat me down for a session and just gave me half an hour. And after that, I felt so much better and really kind of spoke me through. I'm still getting my head around management accounts. Oh my words, I hate them. I'm learning, but I'm digesting. And interesting on the point, like maybe those from lower socioeconomic backgrounds are the kind of fiscally responsible ones. I know if I'm running a budget, it's cost saving. So there are kind of different levels of knowledge and also just resilience in general that organisations can utilise. Excellent. So we are going to break shortly, but I know, Michelle, you've got a couple of slides or a slide to share. Just thinking about intersectionality, should we touch on that and then aim for a break in 3 or 4 minutes? Is that okay? Yeah, Jonathan, I've seen the thumbs up. Excellent. So we've maybe we've covered it some kind of ways indirectly through this, but thinking about how, yes, it's absolutely important for us to consider socioeconomic diversity, but also acknowledging that individuals can be from different backgrounds. So I'm somebody from a low income background, but I'm also a mixed race individual. I'm also young. There's lots of different things. So Michelle, I think you were going to share your members survey from Museums Muck, just to bring attention as well to this point.
Yeah, so we certainly wanted to bring in the issue of intersectionality to this conversation, and one of the things that we talk about often is that there is a real lack of data in this area, and particularly, I mean, certainly I don't really know of any, so if anybody else does, information about socioeconomic diversity in boards, but there's a general lack of information about socioeconomic diversity and working in the cultural sector. So Museums Muck in 2021 decided to do our own research, because one of the huge assets that we have is our membership. We have over 700 members across the UK. So we did a survey in 2021 and 340 of our members responded. So what we've found out is that our membership is intersectional. So what we can see on this first slide here is that we have much higher levels of people living with a disability than the general population, and over 3 times the amount in the museum's workforce. So if you come from a lower socioeconomic background, you're more likely to be living with a disability. Next slide, please.
Apologies, Michelle. I've only got the first image. I couldn't get the second one up. I'm really sorry.
Oh, okay. Well, I'll just talk through. So I wanted to also draw attention to that. In addition to disability, gender is one of the intersectional lenses that crosses over with class, and that is that women are much more likely to experience poverty than men, and Museum as Muck's members are, we've got 77.9% female identifying. And finally, with regards to ethnic diversity, and it's a shame we don't have the slides here because there's some really great stats, so hopefully we will share them with you after. But our membership is slightly less diverse than the UK population, but that's no surprise when we consider that, you know, there were some shocking sector stats. I think it was the 2014 panic report that said that it was only 2.7% of our workforce comes from an ethnically diverse background. Yes, but our membership, Museum as Muck members, are I think ours is 11.8%. So there's some comparative stats that show amongst some other sector data that we have a much higher membership of people who come from Black, Asian and ethnically diverse backgrounds. So I guess, you know, the point here of this evidence is that if you're from a lower socioeconomic background, you're more likely to be living with a disability, be a woman or from an ethnically diverse background. And therefore, for us, it means that when we do this work to remove barriers for people from low socioeconomic backgrounds, we are doing that across all different types of demographics, and we are bringing a much more rich level of experience and individual to our work and to our governance.
Excellent. Thank you so much. And I think it's a fantastic kind of something to think about then when we enter the Q&A session after the break, and maybe we can start to have a think and feed into yes, some of the audience's questions. But thank you for sharing those insights. Okay, Jonathan, and thank you as well, Marie and Michelle, for a fantastic conversation. I'm sure we can pick it up some point in the future over coffee, because I feel like we've just scratched the surface. But Jonathan, finally, thank you, back over to you, and thank you, audience members, for listening.
All right, it is 3 minutes past 11. Welcome back, everybody. We've got half an hour. We don't want to overrun if possible, so there's a lot to pack in here. There's already quite a lot of questions coming up in the chat. Thank you for all the really interesting things coming up. I wondered whether I might start off, actually, because that discussion that the three of you were having before the break was fascinating, and all of you, I think, at different times mentioned this sort of not for me aspect of governance and how that feels like something that's particularly true for people from low socioeconomic backgrounds. And then I was reflecting on a number of things you were saying about language and middle class codes, all really pertinent. And I just wondered from the three of you whether you have any specific advice on how to address those aspects of governance where it doesn't communicate well enough for people from backgrounds who feel excluded, particularly around recruitment, but actually also how do board papers work, how do meetings work? What are your tips and advice in that space for how to make that more inclusive?
I've got a couple of bits, if that's all right, particularly from working with young trustees of all different backgrounds. Really chunky induction, I think, is really important. And I think reassuring them that boards are all different, they've all got their own weird and wonderful quirks, but that actually the only stupid question is, why have we gone bust? That is a dumb question. Every other question is completely legitimate, and please do ask it and find loads of channels and ways to ask questions that doesn't have to be just in the meeting. In terms of board papers, I'm sure other people do this already, but just be really clear about what's for information, what's for decision, what's the discussion, what's the debate. In the organisation where I was the chief exec, we did an abolishment of AOB because it just got a bit weird and it got really railroaded by particular individuals. So we were like, let's not do AOB, let's just do B, and we'll do that through the meeting, and had like quite an open discussion with folks around what they wanted to see, what they wanted to make sure they covered. And then lots of that actually we could just do ahead of the meeting and make the meeting be more collegiate, constructive, and discursive. And I think we found no shame as well in doing really intensive colour coding of management accounts to make sure that you could see like what meant we've lost money, what meant we've made money, what meant that this was a problem, and even some sample questions around like, so some trustees might ask X, Y, Z, is that something you want to ask? Or, actually, if you got that, do you want to ask something else? The only thing I would say about that is, from an organisational perspective, it's absolutely loads of work. And I think the impact on senior team and chief exec particularly is significant. But then I think that's something you broker and agree between the board and yourself as the senior leader around, like, how are we going to play this as a team? How much of my time do you need on this? How much of my time do you need doing something else? And let's bring in other support if we need to do it. So just breaking it down like that. And then suddenly, once everyone was all fair with lots of things, you can chunk it back up into different ways of receiving that information. I know some folks do little videos, some folks do little précis, little intros and things like that just kind of break it up and not be like presented with this monolith of papers, and you don't end up with people just saying ultravirus to each other and having no idea even what ultravirus means. Kind of a bit of a glossary type situation of like, what are these things that you might come across, and let's understand them.
I'd absolutely echo that. And thinking about the importance of kind of being inducted onto a board. I mean, I haven't seen it yet, but I know that as Marie's kind of noted, the amount of work for the organisation, something in the Jerwood Toolkit, the themes running through are time, resource and space. So being able to curate the time to do it, having the resource to do it, and the headspace sometimes. But I'm just kind of imagining something that I've wanted to do for a while to support some people on the boards that I work with, and for myself selfishly, it's kind of like an example set of minutes which could be annotated. I know there's lots of even jargon with AOB, etc. Like people might not know what that term means. So really breaking it down and maybe having within this trustee pack, pretty much simplifying everything. And again, just kind of thinking about supporting people before they even take that first step. So I know Norwich Theatre at the moment are doing a fantastic programme of work for young cultural leaders. I'm going to be speaking to the group in May, I think, but kind of prepping and gearing people up ahead of the chance where they may want to go for or to be on a board, but actually just breaking things down before and kind of offering some training and development opportunities. And then I think these middle class codes, that's another panel in itself, isn't it? So I think rather than kind of going through, and there's a lot which I think sometimes even I'm not aware of, and I kind of walk out of a conversation even now kind of mid-career and think I have no idea what just went on. There was conversations happening between the lines. I don't think I quite got that, and reflect on it and think, oh, that's what happens. But I think that piece is more about creating that inclusive culture. So can board members ask each other? Are we kind of brokering those relationships? What's the relationship board members have with the executive? If there is a kind of a clerk or a secretary kind of type role in the organisation, I know in those that I've engaged with is normally that executive director level. So are they approachable? Is there any ways that trustees can leave feedback? Again, not piling work on organisations, but just having that open conversation would be my, I think, thoughts on that section.
Thank you. I'm gonna pick out a few of the questions that have come in the chat, if that's all right. And the first I thought was a really good one from Jim earlier on, which was, who's doing this really well? And I wondered if any of you had any thoughts. Sorry, Michelle, have I just interrupted you? So sorry.
Can you hear me? Or am I having sound? Okay, I just wanted to add to that before we move on. All of that stuff around, minutes and papers and all that, that's just like, processes that people can learn, like, people from low socioeconomic backgrounds, not idiots. You just learn that stuff. It's more the stuff that is not like, just a skill that you learn. It's not assuming experiences is really important. Being proactive in asking people what they need. So if you don't know what the barriers are for a person from a low socioeconomic background, don't, like I said before, don't wait for them to come. Be proactive. Go to them and say, what is it you need? Because also, we're not all the same. So people are going to need different things. And, consider pastoral care. Who on that board is looking after people's welfare, being a board member? So I just wanted to add those things.
Thank you.
Moved on.
That's really good points. Thank you, Michelle. And something really interesting there about intersectionality, which maybe we'll come to as well, I think. But can we go back to that question from Jim, actually, just simply about good examples? Do any of you have really great examples of boards where this is done well already?
I can plug Spread the Word. And I just happen to be a trustee on the board. So Spread the Word is fantastic. So it's London's writer development agency, for those that might not be aware, run by the fantastic Ruth Harrison, who is an absolute goddess, to say the least. But my onboarding to the charity was fantastic. I kind of looked at the opportunity and thought, wow, I need, to be 20 years into my career to even consider this. Admittedly did speak to a couple of people that I was lucky enough to have a network with through Jerwood Connection, so that's something just to highlight. And then had a meeting with Sandy, who just completely debunked everything and gave me that confidence. But thinking about the recruitment process, which was a really informal meeting, and a highlight of any questions, the way they did their recruitment process was, of course, they needed to know that individuals had the skills, but it's very much focused on values as well. So, I really love that. I mean, it's all fun and games having somebody that, chimes to the same beat of the drum, but isn't prepared to hold the responsibility. So there is a bit of balancing, but there was something really unique about that interview process or conversation then to get me inducted anyway. And Spread the Word, I mean, their board or our board figures in terms of diversity representation have always been above par. They do really perform within that, but I think they fought, as much as I'm aware, they've historically thought quite carefully about who they'd like to be able to run the organisation. I think naturally their programme and their engagement with different communities made it slightly not easier, but they had the connections, or they were able to attract individuals that may think that it is for them, because the board will look like the non-chat GPT affluent board member. And again, when they host meetings as well, it's all very inclusive. I think it's just comfortable. I don't think I felt intimidated, which is interesting. And again, I've shadowed or supported a lot of boards in my roles where I've kind of been shaking and been in the minuting role or presenting a paper. But yeah, so just thinking about recruitment process, getting people onto the board anyway. The language in the advert, I remember just kind of something just clicked and thought, I think they're going to understand me. No random, terminology I had to Google. It was just really inclusive. So I don't know whether that's, a useful description, but shameless plug. They're really a fantastic board.
Thank you. Any more on that front?
I've got one, which is again a bit of a plug, though not for me, because they're currently looking for a co-chair, but it's an organisation called Diversity, who are based in the Southwest. Really brilliant organisation, performing arts company that's completely built on diversity, as you might imagine from the name. And They've got an excellent reputation, but the way that they're really clear in their recruitment materials around kind of, yes, this is you that we want. We know that we need more folks who are from all different parts of the community, including socioeconomic backgrounds. And it really feels like an open invitation. And the very kind of co-chair model, the kind of dispersed leadership model that they operate feels inclusive.
Thank you.
I'll just add there, and this isn't kind of personal experience of, although I have spoken to the organisation, but I know that the Museum of Homelessness have a really interesting model of democratising governments by having the board plus a group of core stakeholders that are service users, and they ensure that that group of stakeholders are just as involved in the decision-making and accountability process as the legal board members. So one to definitely explore.
Thank you. Right, I'm going to quickly try and get through some more of the questions because we've got quite a few and they're really good. So the next one up from Catherine Waddington, I thought was very interesting about changing the formality and atmosphere of board meetings. We talked about it a bit before, and particularly around anything on experience of, say, moving meetings or changing ambience of meetings.
I think Zoom remote joining has changed our world for the better for some. I think kind of thinking about, so is this like timings of boards, etc., the way we host them, and some of the things that we could be doing. I mean, at NTW, we operate a completely hybrid board, obviously kind of having a think about digital poverty as well, so that needs to come into it. But there's things, you know, sending surveys, doodle poll is a saviour out to trustees quite early, quite late or early before the new financial year, whatever your kind of governance structure is, to identify dates. I know we've kind of made some reasonable adjustments to individuals that might have caring responsibilities, so times may fluctuate. Again, those logistical changes that we can do. And again, I think kind of ambience in the room. I mean, boards are usually, the agenda is usually packed, aren't they? There's a lot to say. It's important that the executive level have that support as well, because they don't often, you know, if you have 4 boards a year, that's only 4 meetings, maybe a couple of subcommittees, that the organisation really gets a floor to be able to gain advice and be steered. So maybe it's kind of thinking about pre-board meets as well and making sure everyone's on the same page. I work with an organisation called TypeAlb, and they're almost a bit of a non-legal regulator for the housing association kind of sector in Wales. And they've adopted quite a clear model, because they invited me to join their board, but I had to say no because of time. And they were really selling it to me, and it was fantastic. And I think they do everything. They have quite chunky papers, not necessarily in length, but in detail. Then straight away, I think that the whoever's presenting, so the CEO, will present everything, and they've got it quite a kind of structured question and answer model that they do. So it means that the conversation isn't being steered, you know, here everyone's super clear what's going to be covered and when. And of course, there is that AOB or B business at the end, that they have that opportunity to discuss other things. But actually, I think maybe controlling the agenda might be of use. And again, I love the idea of a glossary as well. If you've just inducted a couple of board members, just spell it out. And again, not to say that they might not mean it, know what it means, but it just, you know, centralizes understanding for everyone.
Thank you. Next question, Fiona Harvey. I wondered if you maybe wanted to speak to this one. It's just about advertising for board members, but actually whether there's anything particular in your question that you wanted to highlight.
Sure, thank you. I assistant on for one of the boards. I'm a trustee of. It's for an organisation I work with. It's just how you go about being really clear about who you're looking for, and the fact that you've identified underrepresentation on your board. But is it, you know, can you be specific about the fact that you're looking for people specifically from, and then if they apply or send you a note or an email, can you require them to say, this is what my background is? because otherwise, I mean, we're all asked to do surveys for Arts Council England, and a lot of people say prefer not to say. But if you want to make sure you've got a good representation on your board, how do you do that at the very beginning when you're trying to attract those people in the first place? Thank you.
I'm happy to start on this. I think that being transparent, being open. We've looked at our board, we've realised that 80% are from this background. We want to change that. Being open about it, that's going to be more appealing to me, to know that you want to make a change. I think that you can be specific and say that we're looking for people from disadvantaged or lower socioeconomic backgrounds. Obviously, you can't make people state their personal details, but in the, you know, you're going to be asking them to apply in some way. And I think that, you know, what you can do is say that we're particularly interested in these groups. So talk about the values that you can bring. So it's kind of up to us then to say, well, you know, what I bring is this lived experience. Yeah, so I think being really open, and even, you know, setting targets as well, like you know, our board is 80% white. By the year 2026, we want to get that to 60%, or, you know, creating real targets.
I definitely think that, yeah, just thinking about the positive action approach, I think you can absolutely take positive action, be that it's legal. The kind of the legislation surrounding that is really useful, long on the Gov website, but it's there if you need it. So there might be some particular steps you can take that are legal if you'd like to kind of take that positive action step, and maybe select individuals from certain backgrounds over those that aren't, if you can justify that there is that gap. And also just thinking about maybe things to aid the recruitment process. So it might be introducing a guaranteed interview kind of model, where if you do get people, just kind of reassuring that they'll get a place even to be in front of you, may be a good thing. Yeah, in terms of, I mean, equality, diversity, equal opportunities forms are always useful, just so you can bank that data. Obviously, kind of surveying the existing body of trustees. We can't, I mean, there's always going to be a couple of prefer not to says at all. But as Michelle said, I think really kind of curating questions that allow individuals to share lived experience, but not putting them on the spot, you know, to say, hey, you know, are you from this background? And I think naturally kind of having an inclusive environment might just urge people, and also thinking about who's on the panel. So maybe if I was on a panel and another individual from a low socioeconomic background, that may be mixed race or a person of colour comes on, I know I always, if I walk into a room and I see somebody like me or relatively like me, the shoulders go down, the breath comes out, and I feel a little bit more able just to be a bit more open. And I know there's people like us on the panel that will plug, you know, identity in their bio. So whether it's somebody within the organisation or external stakeholder that might be able to be reflective of the type of person that you're looking for, I think is always a win.
Thank you. Catherine, I think, has just posted something really interesting in the chat. Catherine, do you want to come in and mention that?
Yeah. Hi. Just to add to what's been said in terms of how we actually communicate the opportunity. So if we use the traditional approaches to advertising in terms of recruitment, we will reach the same people. So we have to really think about those routes. So those individuals that you're looking to recruit to boards might not be within your own networks. So how do you engage with the networks that those individuals are reaching? So it could be asking other organisations who are working with particular demographics to share with their participants, for example. So really doing the work on how and where we recruit and not relying on sort of the usual operation.
Thank you. That chimes also with what Sobe has just said in the chat around asking questions in different ways as well, to allow for broad expressions of sharing. I think that's a really good point. Thanks, Catherine. Appreciate that. I wondered, as a sort of final question, it's less a question, but it's more a statement that came earlier from Anita about the intersection of socioeconomic diversity and hope laden. I thought that was really fascinating. Anita, if you're still in the room, do you fancy speaking to that as our sort of final go-to? Have we still got Anita?
I am still in the room. Okay, I'm not going to put my video on.
Okay.
Because what's come up for me is I was reading something. So I'm neurodiverse, and Zoom meetings like this, I can probably only take about 45 minutes usually. That's why I stay off camera and stuff. And but I was also thinking about, when you were talking, the whole kind of like thing around economic diversity and being invited or wanting to consider being part of a board. It throws up lots of questions around kind of like the nature of your kind of like interaction on the board, being a board member with the organization and with the expectations that might be required of you. And you might want to take part, but it's like I know for myself as a freelance that kind of like when you're in a when your life is within a kind of like particular socioeconomic strata, that you're always kind of like trying to sort of maybe striving to improve your situation by getting involved with things, whether it's boards or organizations or whatever. And they may already exist a kind of like mindset where, if I do this another piece of work where I'm not compensated, that might lead to something better. And you can find yourself in this cycle where you're doing more unpaid work than paid work, which then exacerbates your economic position. And I think that that's true for a lot of women. I think that's true for a lot of older women. I'm in my 60s and I still work, and I will have to continue working. And there is this kind of the level of ageism that I've become aware of in the last few years, in terms of the assumptions and the way that language is used, that it can be excluding, that it's not even in the consciousness of the group that you might become part of. So, and it's not conscious necessarily, it's not malicious or any of those kinds of things, but there are a lot of intersections around that attach themselves to economic diversity that, need to be taken into account. That, I would love to be on some boards, but I've seen one just yesterday for an organization that I love, that I really respect. They're looking for people with specific experience, like financial management and whatever. And there was a couple of others. And if you're as a freelance, your financial you live in a constant state of insecurity, and your financial management is kind of like a make or break. And that, is that life experience, it's too informal to be part of a formal structure, if that makes sense. So it's just about being really, really clear about who you're asking and why you're asking them, and how you're going to make space to accommodate them and assist them in their role. Because I think from my perspective, being a part of a board is as much. I have my own CIC, so it's as much a job as a paid job, if that makes sense. And I know about the kind of like funding landscape and how difficult it is to find money to pay people properly for the work that they do, but that has to become part of the norm, I think.
Okay. I'm going to have to close you off, not because it's not interesting, but because we're running out of time. I'm so sorry, but thank you so much for sharing that. Panel, any responses quickly before we close up?
Lots of that resonated. I think I came across Unlimited's Nothing for Nothing campaign, stroke information gathering piece quite recently, and I think I'm really interested to see how that pans out. We've alluded to it here and there. We haven't been able to tackle it head on, but there is a conversation about the very model of governance and charity boards being quite patrician, quite old school, and maybe some fundamental shifts would be desirable to make sure that we can be as inclusive as possible. Again, that's probably another webinar. But yeah, I agree with the current state of the structures. There are some real difficulties.
Yeah. Thank you so much. I'm really sorry to sort of cut us short, because it's, as always with these things, the conversation gets interesting and you feel like you go on for ages, but we do want to stay in time. So I'm going to have to close it up there. A really big thank you to our three panelists, Della, Marie, and Michelle. You've been brilliant. Really fascinating to hear you. Thanks everybody else for your questions this morning. I hope the discussion has proved useful. And do keep the conversation going. Social media channels, there's lots of websites, which I think Freya is going to share in the chat. The next webinar is in a month's time. We're looking at restitution, repatriation, and colonial heritage. That's a subject I know is topical for lots of you, particularly in the museum sector, and we're working with the Association of Independent Museums for that. But that's it for today. Thank you so much, Della, Michelle, Marie. Thanks again. You've been brilliant.
Thank you so much, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye now. Take care.
Bye, everyone. See you.